Hello again. Here we go with another of our lockdown specials, hopefully to keep us together while we're apart. This is part 2 of our programme on Nottinghamshire Awards of the Victoria Cross. We know that the Victoria Cross is awarded for valour in the presence of the enemy to members of the British Armed Services. And we have now reached the awards made to Nottinghamshire people during the First World War. More than half of the Nottinghamshire VCs were awarded in this conflict. In 1870, Germany had been unified as a country under the rule of the Brandenburg-Prussian dynasty of the Hohenzollerns. Since 1905, a German master plan had existed to fight a swift war that would occupy France, neutralize Britain, and gain control of Western Europe before Russia and the other world powers could intervene. In 1914, Europe was still largely ruled by the dynastic families. Peace was delicately balanced on a complex system of treaties and alliances, when a tiny flame in the Balkans enveloped Europe and then the world. The problem was that the German master plan didn't work. Instead of enveloping Paris, it fell short and failed to envelop Paris at all. And the guns of August introduce what quickly becomes the First World War. The war to end all wars started in a rush, with Germany trying to encircle Paris, and the French army and the British Expeditionary Force marching up and down Belgium and France until the stalemate developed in the trenches of the Western Front. Every wartime statistic was rapidly overtaken, as the war sucked in every kind of resource, including men. And because the war frequently called for ludicrous acts of bravery, the Victoria Cross, along with the Croix de Guerre, the Congressional Medal of Honor, and on the other side the Blue Max pour le Mérite Awards, almost became routine. 628 Victoria Cross Awards were made during World War I, and of the 21 Nottinghamshire winners of the Victoria Cross, more than half of them earned their Victoria Cross between 1914 and 1918. Several of our meetings have mentioned Captain Albert Ball VC, who was born and raised in Nottingham. Ball joined the Sherwood Foresters at the outbreak of the First World War and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in October of 1914. He soon transferred to the Royal Flying Corps, flying early combat missions in France. After a spell of home leave in 1917, Ball was posted to No. 56, the Flying Aces Squadron, which deployed to the Western Front in April of 1917. During an air battle on the 7th of May 1917, he flew into a cloud. He came out of it too low and crashed into a field and was killed, sparking a wave of national mourning and posthumous recognition, which included the award of the Victoria Cross for his actions during his final tour of duty. His father had been the mayor and sheriff of Nottingham, His father then bought the field where Ball crashed and made it a remembrance shrine. He also arranged for a commemorative statue to be placed in Nottingham Castle's gardens, and Ball's medals and various other memorabilia are on display inside Nottingham Castle, including his Victoria Cross. The Western Front was a narrow strip of France stretching from the Channel to the Swiss border, where the entire destructive force of modern war was released for 4 years. It wasn't long before every semblance of civilized living was destroyed, and those fighting on the front line lived in a sea of squalor, mud, disease, and death. It wasn't long before acts of heroism and valour had to be recognised. It wasn't long before the Victoria Cross was being awarded. Robert James Bye was born in Pontypridd and moved to Nottinghamshire to work in the coal mines. But before he moved, he firstly joined the Welsh Guards and, aged 27, was a sergeant at the 3rd Battle of Ypres, better known as Passchendaele. The Guards attacked at Pilcombe Ridge, with the leading units following a creeping barrage of artillery. They achieved their first objective, but were then halted by 2 pillboxes. Bye rushed one, put it out of action, and he then rejoined his unit, and the advance continued. As the Guards moved to attack the Green Line, they were held up by a series of blockhouses. Bye volunteered to lead an attack on these, which was successful, and the advance maintained its momentum, capturing the blockhouses and taking many prisoners. More prisoners were taken as the Guards reached the Green Line. Passchendaele was successful all along the front for its first days, but then the weather turned and it started to rain, and the weather started to win, and the battle bogged down. The citation read, Number 939, Sergeant Robert Bye, Welsh Guards. Sergeant Bye displayed the utmost courage and devotion to duty during an attack on the enemy's position. Seeing that the leading waves were being troubled by 2 enemy blockhouses, he, on his own initiative, rushed at one of them and put the garrison out of action. He then rejoined his company and went forward to assault the second objective. When the troops had gone forward to the attack on a third objective, a party was detailed to clear up a line of blockhouses which had been passed. Sergeant Bye volunteered to take charge of this party. Accomplishing his objective, he took many prisoners. He subsequently advanced to the third objective, capturing a number of prisoners, thus rendering invaluable assistance to the assaulting companies. He displayed throughout the most remarkable initiative. After the war, Bye moved to Nottinghamshire to work as a coal miner. He went on to serve in World War II as a sergeant major of the Sherwood Foresters, guarding prisoners of war. He was forced to leave the army with pneumoconiosis, contracted in the pits, and served in the Home Guard as a temporary police constable. He was undoubtedly a brave and committed man. His Victoria Cross is displayed at the Welsh Guards Regimental Headquarters in London. John Joseph Caffrey left Ireland at an early age and settled in Nottingham. Joining the army in 1910, he was 24 years old and a private in the 2nd Battalion York and Lancaster Regiment when he fought an action which awarded him the VC. On the 16th of November, a man was badly wounded and lying in the open, unable to move, in full view of and about 350 yards from the enemy's trenches. Private Caffrey and a corporal of the Royal Army Medical Corps at once tried to rescue the wounded man. Their first attempts were driven back by shrapnel from enemy fire, but they succeeded in reaching the wounded man. However, just as they were lifting him up, the Royal Army Medical Corps corporal was shot in the head. Private Caffrey bandaged the corporal and helped him back to safety, and then returned and brought in the other wounded man. Another brave immigrant to Nottinghamshire. William Dolby Fuller, born in Greasley, Nottinghamshire. At 18, he joined the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards. He initially served in a military policeman role at Chelsea Barracks. However, Wilfred was a keen sportsman and volunteered for the battalion's bomber section. These men would advance in front of the other guards, armed only with a bag of the newly invented hand grenades. It was a sort of First World War version of kamikaze pilots. In 1915, the battalion was deployed to France, and Wilfred saw action at the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle as a lance corporal. He was in charge of a small section of bombers who, on the second day of the battle, the 12th of March 1915, advanced onto the German trench lines. Lance Corporal Fuller saw a party of the enemy trying to escape along a communication trench and ran towards them and killed the leading man with a bomb. The remaining 50 men, seeing no means of evading the bombs, all surrendered to Lance Corporal Fuller, who was quite alone at the time. A sort of British version of the all-American hero Sergeant York. In March 1916, he married Helena May Wheeler, a nurse at the Hammersmith Hospital, and later the same year he was discharged from the army on medical grounds. In 1919 he joined the Somerset Police and died aged 54 in 1947. He is buried at Frome, and his VC is displayed at the Grenadier Guards Headquarters, London. Corporal Charles Ernest Garforth of the 15th King's Hussars. He and his unit were cut off between the lines on the 23rd of August 1914 at Harmignies. He volunteered to cut a section of the wire under fire, which enabled his squadron to escape. On the 2nd of September, when under constant fire, he extricated a sergeant who was lying under his dead horse and carried him to safety. The next day, when another sergeant had lost his horse in a similar way, Corporal Garforth drew off the enemy fire and enabled the sergeant to get away. These acts of sustained courage won him the Victoria Cross. He died at home in Beeston on the 1st of January 1973 and was cremated, so there was no headstone or grave. But a memorial stone was erected in 2003. His Victoria Cross and other medals are displayed at the Imperial War Museum in London. The Somme offensive introduced a new tactic to try to break the stalemate. It had been tried once in the American Civil War and was based on the tactic to deal with castles in medieval times. Miners were recruited to dig 19 mines underneath the German positions. These would be filled with explosives and detonated to disrupt the German defences when the attacks went in. Digging the mines had the normal risks of mining, but also the dangers of countermining, the tunnels being collapsed by explosives laid by German miners. Sapir William Hackett was a Nottinghamshire miner. He was recruited to serve in the 254th Tunnelling Company of the Royal Engineers as a tunneller. He was awarded the Victoria Cross on 22nd and 23rd of June 1916 at the Shaftesbury Avenue mine in Givenchy-les-Labbas. Unfortunately, the award was posthumous. An enemy countermine exploded, and Sapir Hackett and 4 other men became entombed. 2 of the men were injured in the collapse, 1 seriously. Sapir Hackett helped dig a narrow escape tunnel, and 3 colleagues escaped, but Hackett remained with the injured 4th man. Both men perished when the tunnel collapsed during a rescue attempt on the 27th of June 1916, 4 days after the initial collapse. The Hohenzollern Redoubt was an impressive German strongpoint on the Western Front. On the 29th of September 1915, the British attacked and managed to reach Big Willie Trench, but they ran short of ammunition. Enter Samuel Harvey, who was born in the Bulwell area of Nottingham in 1881. Harvey volunteered to run backwards and forwards over a bullet-swept terrain for 13 hours, and during that time he brought 30 boxes of bombs to the front line, an action that eventually drove the enemy back. He suffered a head wound but survived the war with a Victoria Cross. William Henry Johnson was also born in the Bulwell area of Nottingham on the 15th of October 1890. He was awarded his Victoria Cross at Ramicourt on the 3rd of October 1918, when he was 27 years old. His platoon was held up by a nest of machine guns at very close range. Johnson worked his way forward under very heavy fire and single-handedly charged the post, bayoneting several gunners and capturing 2 machine guns. During the attack he was severely wounded by a bomb, but continued to lead his men forward. Shortly afterwards they were again held up by machine guns, and again he rushed forward and attacked the enemy single-handed. With wonderful courage he bombed the garrison and put the guns out of action and captured the teams. The citation for his award of the Victoria Cross was posted in the London Gazette on the 14th of December 1918. The VC was presented to him by King George V at Buckingham Palace on the 29th of March 1919. In March 1920 he was also awarded the French Médaille Militaire. He served in the Home Guard during World War II, but while serving in a searchlight unit, he suffered an injury that necessitated a leg amputation. He was admitted to hospital at Sheffield, and shortly afterwards his other leg developed gangrene and had to be amputated below the knee. Sadly, William did not recover from these injuries and died on the 25th of April 1945. He was buried at Red Hill Cemetery, Nottingham, with full military honours. And J. Caffrey VC, who we've already heard about in this programme, attended his funeral. An early attempt to bypass the stalemate of the Western Front had been made in February 1915 with the landings at Gallipoli. The invasion was badly planned, and the leadership at the War Office staff planners was half-hearted because they saw it as a distraction from the big show. However, for the soldiers actually committed to it on the ground, it simply became another stalemate. This time in sand and blazing sun instead of mud and pouring rain. The idea cost 187,959 Allied deaths, and the Allies evacuated from the same beaches they had landed in January 1916, less than a year. Gallipoli had many acts of bravery, and 7 VCs were won in the campaign. Walter Richard Parker was born in Grantham. He was 33 years old and a Lance Corporal in the Royal Marines Light Infantry Division during the Gallipoli campaign, when he became a 9th Victoria Cross recipient of the First World War. On the 25th of April, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps landed in force at Helles. Within a few days of the Anzac landings, the Turks were launching fierce counterattacks, and a brigade of the Royal Naval Division was sent to Helles to augment the still endangered front line, which as yet was not a continuous line, but no more than a series of outposts. Parker was serving as a medical orderly, and when a strong Turkish attack came in on the 30th of April, he went from post to post, carrying medical supplies, and attended to the wounded under heavy fire. On the night of the 31st of April, 1st of May, one of the isolated posts, with about 40 men in it, came under very heavy fire and several men were wounded. Without hesitation, Parker went forward with a squad of men across open ground that was swept by rifle and machine gun fire to relieve and reinforce the isolated trench. Parker was the only one to reach the trench, and he spent the night attending to wounded and dressing their wounds. The next morning the enemy were driven off and the trench evacuated. But Parker refused to be evacuated and stayed to attend the worst of the wounded until ambulance carts arrived to carry them to safety. Only later was it discovered that he had been so seriously wounded that he would never fully recover. It was some time before his Gazette came through, and his company commander and RSM had to repeat the report of the incidents and made sure that attention was paid. He was invalided out of the Marine Service and died at Stapleford, Notts, at the age of 55. There is a paved area in Stapleford town centre named after him. His VC is displayed at the Royal Marine Museum, Southsea. Number 10 in our World War I list is James Upton. He was 27 years old and a corporal in the 1st Battalion, the Sherwood Foresters, during the Battle of Aubers Ridge. On the 9th of May 1915, at Rouge Blanc, France, Corporal Upton rescued several wounded men who were lying in no man's land, exposed to rifle and artillery fire. Several times Upton had to go close to the enemy's parapet to pick up wounded and bring them back to the friendly trench. One wounded man was actually killed by a shell splinter whilst on Upton's back. When not actually carrying the wounded, he was engaged in dressing and bandaging the serious cases in front of the parapet, where he was still exposed to heavy rifle and machine gun fire, but he survived. Upton's Victoria Cross can be seen in the Sherwood Foresters Museum in Nottingham Castle. Charles Geoffrey Vickers was born and grew up in Nottingham, where his father, Charles Henry Vickers, ran a successful lace business, Vickers and Hine Limited. In his life, he was an English lawyer, administrator, writer, and pioneering systems scientist. He had varied interests, with roles in the London Passenger Transport Board, the Law Society, the Medical Research Council, and the Mental Health Research Fund. In later years, he wrote and lectured on social systems analysis and the complex patterns of social organization. However, in 1914, his career was interrupted when he and his brother volunteered for the 7th Robin Hood Battalion, Sherwood Foresters. He was commissioned on the 2nd of September 1914 and went to France on the 28th of February 1915. He was appointed acting captain on the 29th of August. He earned his Victoria Cross on the 14th of October 1915, when the Sherwood Foresters again attacked the Hohenzollern redoubt. The enemy's defences pushed the Foresters down the Big Willie Trench, where Vickers held a barrier across the trench against heavy German bomb attacks. The bombs in the citation referred to hand grenades. He then ordered a second barrier to be built behind him to secure the safety of his men, regardless of the fact that his own retreat would be cut off. The second barrier allowed his surviving men to hold off the counterattack. When the pressure slackened, the Foresters retired in good order. Vickers' wounds were serious enough for him to be evacuated to England. The VC was presented by King George V at Buckingham Palace on the 15th of January 1916. While recovering, he served with the Reserve Battalion from 1st June and was appointed temporary captain on 30th of July. After a short spell back in France, during which his brother was killed in action, he returned to England to become a company commander at No. 19 Officer Cadet Battalion, Pirbright, on the 20th of February 1917. He was graded as a staff captain while commanding a company within the Officer Cadet Battalion. 5th May 1917 to 6th January 1918. But Charles also had a distinguished career in World War II. He was granted a regular Army Emergency Commission with the Sherwood Foresters and later with the Royal Army Ordnance Corps as a lieutenant in June 1940. He held several positions in the Foreign Office during World War II and was a member of the Joint Intelligence Committee from 1941 to 1945. He resigned his commission and was granted the rank of Major from September 1944. Charles was knighted in January 1946 for his services as Director General of the Economic Intelligence Division of the Foreign Office. His medals are displayed at the Sherwood Foresters Museum, Nottingham. It was November the 11th, 1918, when the killing stopped. But it didn't stop for long. This ends part 2 of our programme on the Nottinghamshire Victoria Crosses. There are only 2 Nottinghamshire Victoria Crosses left. I hope this programme has been interesting enough for you to go on to watch part 3. The only VCs awarded to a Nottinghamshire man in World War II, and secondly, the only VC awarded to someone who was actually born in Newark-on-Trent. I can assure you they are stories worth the telling. I hope you think they are worth the listening.